How many of you have realized and recognized the plethora of warning labels and warning signs that are out there these days? Some ridiculous signs, I think. I did some research last week. I came across a few what I would call unnecessary warning labels. All right, let me give you a couple of them. One is on a tractor. The warning label simply read, "Caution, avoid death." All right, that's pretty good advice. I think it's always good advice, okay? We can put that everywhere. On a baby stroller, it said, "Warning, remove infant before folding stroller for storage." My two kids are still alive and well today. I don't think we've ever been tempted to fold up the stroller. Anyway, how about this? On a Batman costume. A Batman costume had a warning label that said this: "Warning, cape does not enable user to fly." Batman doesn't fly. That doesn't make sense to me. Anyway, that's Superman. I have a chainsaw in my garage. I used to use it all the time. I don't use it much anymore. But anyway, on the chainsaw, there is a label that says this: "Do not attempt to stop chain with hands." Good advice. On a sign, just a typical sign, it says, "Caution, this sign has sharp edges." Huh, okay. How about this one? "Touching wires causes instant death, $200 fine." If you're dead, how are you going to pay the $200 fine? I mean, they're really going to get you, right? Everywhere we look, we see these unnecessary signs, I think. But isn't it true that sometimes we need to be warned that we're in a dangerous situation? I mean, if you really think about it, if we ignore these warnings, we can find ourselves ending up in some pretty devastating circumstances. Now, since the 1870s, get this, at the Grand Canyon, at one of their sites at the Grand Canyon, 700 people have died in the Grand Canyon. Now, the results of those deaths, we read about, they've come from airplane accidents or river rafting accidents, but most of the deaths occurring at the Grand Canyon were a result of people who just went too close to the edge. Too close to the edge. Now, these people went out to an area where signs overtly warned them to stay away. Keep off, stay away. But they plummeted to their deaths because they got too close to the edge. Sometimes in life we read warning signs that we just shouldn't ignore. The problem, though, is that we overlook these warning signs, I think, because there are just so many of them. You know, which ones do I pay attention to? Which ones do I not pay attention to? You know, so we've seen all of these signs and we go, okay, you know, I'm just tired of looking at signs and warning labels and that kind of thing, so I'm just going to ignore them. And throughout the story, we've read how God has moved in and through people and how he spoke in so many different ways that the people in the Bible, I think, missed some of the significant signs that God posted. It seems like there were just so many of them. And we're left thinking, how did they miss this? I don't understand. You know, if God would have come to me, I would have followed him and done what he said. Yet, how many times do we today ignore the warning signs in our own lives and the warning signs that we read about in the Bible? So this week we turn to God's messengers, or we know them better as prophets. We talk about the prophets of the Bible. But these were messengers who served as warning signs to the Israelites. And they had a very clear message: stay away. That was it. Stay away. Check this out from 2 Chronicles chapter 36, verse 15. It says, "The Lord, the God of their fathers, sent word to them through his messengers," or prophets, "again and again, because he had pity on his people and on his dwelling place." Now, we're going to look this week in the next couple of weeks, we're going to look at some of these messengers or prophets whom God sent to warn his people. They came with a very clear message. Today we're going to focus on the northern kingdom of Israel. Last week we learned that Israel was divided into two separate kind of nations, but they were just divided into two northern and southern kingdoms. And the first king of Israel was who? Do you remember? We talked about him last week. Who was the first king of the northern kingdom of Israel? Jeroboam. Thank you. You guys are awesome. See? If I have you repeat it, you kind of remember. It kind of sticks. All right, so Jeroboam. Now, Jeroboam, we read last week, he was a very evil king. He did what was wrong in the sight of God. And then it doesn't get any better from there. As you read the succession of kings from Jeroboam on down, it just gets worse and worse. Jeroboam has Nadab. Nadab has Baasha, then Elah, then Zimri, then Omri. And the Bible says with each of the kings, they did evil in the sight of the Lord. All right? Then we get to 1 Kings chapter 16, verse 30, and we read this. Ahab, son of Omri, did more evil in the eyes of the Lord than any of those before him. It got worse and worse and worse, and this guy was like the worst of the worst. By the way, Ahab's wife, do you know who she was? Yeah, Jezebel. Jezebel. Not just a Jezebel. This is the Jezebel. Okay? This is the Jezebel. Like, you hear about a Jezebel, I mean, this is the one that we talk about, okay? So his wife was Jezebel. She's the one who killed all the prophets of God so that she could build a temple for her false god, Baal. Baal. So God has one surviving prophet left. Thank God, right? So he sends Elijah to King Ahab with a message. All right, so here's what it says in 1 Kings 17. As the Lord, the God of Israel lives, whom I serve, this is Elijah speaking, there will be neither dew nor rain in the next few years except at my word. This is Elijah talking to Ahab. He's the last surviving prophet of the Lord, and this is his message. And here's the deal. God sees that Ahab and Jezebel and all of the Israelites have a problem. And their problem is idolatry. They have an idol problem. You know, when we study the prophets, idolatry, as we go through the next couple of weeks, it'll surface as one of the major issues God contends with. All right? And as you read the Bible cover to cover, honestly, it's one of the issues that God contends with all of us. He has an issue with all of us in idolatry. The first two of the 10 Commandments deal with idolatry. There are over 1,000 verses that deal with idolatry in the Bible. And attached to idolatry is the death penalty. All right? The warning label when it comes to idolatry is very clear. Caution, idolatry shall lead to death. Plain and simple. So why is idolatry such a big deal? And I think as we've learned throughout the story, we've learned that the story is all about the glory of God. It's all about the glory of God. And your story and my story and the story is all about the glory of God. Idolatry robs God of his glory. And so God takes issue with that. Look at how seriously God deals with idolatry. In Exodus 20, verse 5, we read the 10 Commandments, and he's talking about idolatry, and here's what it says. God says, "You shall not bow down to them or worship them. For I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God." And then he takes a step further, punishing the children for the sin of the fathers to the third and fourth generation of those who hate me. God has an issue with idolatry. Now, I think we as Christians and maybe even as Americans, we kind of tend to skip over this section in Scripture where it talks about idolatry and the images that are set up. Because I think in our heads, it doesn't seem relevant to us today. You know, it's not like I have a golden image sitting on my mantle at home that I bow down to every night, right? It's not like I have one of those Asherah poles sitting in my backyard that I go out and sacrifice to every night. We don't have these idols that we have set up. But so we think maybe idolatry doesn't seem to relate to us today, but is it possible that our idols look just a little bit differently than they did back then? I was watching a recent episode of Friends. By the way, best show on the planet. I love the show Friends. Anyway, I was watching the show Friends in an episode recently where they all travel to Barbados because Ross is the keynote speaker for one of the most anticipated paleontologist conference of the year. Okay, so Ross is speaking at this conference. They're all down in Barbados celebrating together, and Joey, I love Joey's character. It's so funny. But anyway, Joey, upon meeting some of these nerdy scientists, he learns that none of them have televisions. To which he asks, "What's all your furniture pointed at?" Is it possible that our idols look a little bit differently today than they did back then? Maybe it's entertainment, maybe it's your television, maybe it's your Facebook, maybe it's your iPhone, maybe it's your iPod, maybe it's your Xbox or something else. Maybe it's not entertainment, maybe it's people. Maybe it's money. Maybe it's our career. What do our idols look like today? And Randy Frazee writes in his companion book to the story, it's called The Heart of the Story, he says this: none of us would ever admit to idol worship, but consider how much time, energy, and money we spend on things that have no eternal value. Then compare it to the time, energy, and money we devote to God. Could it be that we're robbing God of His glory? Could it be? The role of the prophet, the messenger, is to help people recognize the reality of idolatry. And there are warning labels all around us, and I think we need to stop, read, and heed. Plain and simple. There are a list of questions in your bulletins. Hopefully you'll take notes. And I've kind of formed these questions to maybe help us pull out. What are maybe some things that have taken God's place in our hearts? What could it be? So question number one is this. Write this in your notes. With what are you most disappointed? As you look at your life, and right now, in this moment in your life, with what are you most disappointed? What's God saying to you this morning? Could it be your career, financial status, sex life, family, marriage? There are things and people in which we tend to put our hope. But what happens when those things fail us, or when those people fail us? You know when that happens. You lose your job. You get an unforeseen bill. Your marriage isn't working out like you want it to. Your family has gone haywire, you know, and you're left with this huge feeling of disappointment. Where's your hope? What would it look like if we simply put our hope in God? You know, don't get me wrong, there's nothing wrong with being disappointed in life, but when disappointment becomes the theme of your life, like you live every day and every day you're disappointed, you got to ask yourself, in what or in whom is my hope? Why am I always disappointed? This doesn't make sense. Maybe another way to ask this question is this. About what do you complain the most? Am I stepping on anybody's toes this morning? Like, I didn't hear like an ouch to that one. I'm stepping on my own toes because I complain about all kinds of different things. Reality check. The answer to that question is going to reveal where your hope lies. It'll reveal something that that has replaced God in some way in your life. Question number 2. For what do you sacrifice your time and money? Jesus, in his Sermon on the Mount, spoke succinctly. He said, for where your treasure is, there's what? Your heart. If you really want to know who or what you worship, look at how you spend your money. Look at how you spend your time. Are you chasing the American dream? Are you chasing the almighty dollar? Are you out there chasing women? Are you chasing down the next score, drugs, alcohol, whatever that is? Where are you sacrificing your time and money? Where's it going? It'll reveal where maybe something has replaced God in our hearts. Question number 3 is this. About what do you worry? That'll point to a lot going on in your life. About what do you worry? What scares you? What consumes your mind? What worries you reveal something that you have replaced God in your heart? Question number 4 is this. Where do you go when you get hurt? Where do you go when you get hurt? Now, this might be big for some of you. When life gets hard, you know, where do you turn? Where do you find comfort? We kind of talked about this last week, you know, about the mentoring thing. I mean, the church should be leading the way in this. We should be leading the way in discipling people and showing people how to live and giving advice and that kind of thing, but we don't. But where do you turn when you get hurt? when life gets hard. We call it comfort food for a reason, right? Some of us may go down to the local bar and do what? Drown our sorrows away because it's comforting. Where do you go for comfort? When we don't get along with our spouse, we feel rejected. Do you enter the pagan shrine of pornography? When life gets hard or difficult, you need to just go numb. How many of you sit down in front of the HD, the high definition idol of television? Where do you go for comfort? Where we go for comfort, it reveals where we put our hope. When you were a kid and you got hurt, to whom did you run? You didn't run to the refrigerator. It doesn't have arms. It can't hug you. You didn't run to the television for comfort. No, you ran to mom and dad. They took care of you because that's where your heart was. You relied on them for comfort. Question number 5, how have we replaced God in our hearts? Maybe it's this. What makes you angry? What makes you angry? There are a few things in life that make me angry. You know what makes me angry? Watching a highly anticipated Cleveland Browns team play a football game where Johnny Football really didn't do anything. That makes me angry. Like it's the same team, just different people and different personnel calling the same play. It makes me angry. But let me ask this. Does that wreck your whole week? I mean, some people live for that, What makes you angry? What wrecks your life? Not just for a couple minutes, but maybe all week long. It's on your mind, and it's not God. It's not a spiritual indignation towards sin. It's something stupid like the Cleveland Browns. Who knows? Anyway, what makes you angry? Question number 6, what brings you the most joy? This is a good question. Because there are a lot of things in life I think bring us joy. What makes you laugh? What makes you feel good inside? And it gets a little bit challenging here because the things that give us joy in life are really gifts from God. Aren't they? I mean, when you think about it, things that make us happy and stuff, God has given us these things to enjoy and have fun with. But the paradigm shift is this. Do the things in which we find joy bring us closer to God? Or do we allow them to maybe compete with God? And what I mean is, do we worship God for his gifts, or do we worship the gift instead? And that's where we got to be careful. So what brings you joy? Last question is this. For whose applause do you long? For whose applause do you long? Where are you seeking approval? Some of us, we seek approval from our boss or our husband or wife or mom or friends. We long to have this approval. Guilty. I love when people tell me how good I am. All right. My love language is appreciation, so I need to hear from my wife all the time. Hey, great job. You're awesome and you're the best. And, you're the strongest and most muscular. I like to hear that stuff. But really, whose applause are you longing for? For whom are you living ultimately? And here's the definition of an idol. I didn't put this in your notes, but you want to write this down. But an idol is anything or anyone other than God that takes the passion, the value, the hope, the glory, and the commitment of your life. To what are you committed? To what are you giving your glory? Where is your hope? Where is the value in your life? So we'll go back to the story. Let's look at what happened to the Israelites. God sends Elijah to Ahab. That's where we are. We've made it through one verse. And Elijah tells Ahab that a drought is coming. This kind of seems strange to us, doesn't it? Who cares? So it's going to stop raining. Sounds great. Look outside this morning like, well, I wish it would stop raining. Where's the sunshine? Anyway, so what's that mean? Get this. Ahab's false god, Baal, was supposedly the guy who controlled the weather. This is the weather god. So they sacrificed to this guy for the sunshine and for the rain so that the crops would grow. Okay? So Baal controls the weather. Do you see what God's doing here? Do you see what God's doing here? Think about this. God is withholding his blessing in the area of Ahab's life that has been elevated to God's status. That's a lot of words. Let me try to put this simply. God tells the Israelites, and he tells Ahab, you want to worship the God of rain? No rain for you. Let me put it even more simply. How can we be surprised when there is a drought in our own lives that matches up with something that has become an equal to the one true God? Am I getting through? Does that make sense? Why would God bless his primary competition? Why would God bless our careers if our career is equal to or greater important, more important than God? Why would God bless his primary competition? Why would God bless our finances if money is more important than God? Why would God bless these things that has taken his place in our hearts? How can we ask God to bless an area of our lives that is more important than him? He's not going to send the rain. What if we were to put God in his rightful place at the center of our lives? It wouldn't be too surprising then to look up to the sky and feel the rain start to fall, would it? I'm going to be a little transparent here this morning. I didn't tell my wife I was doing this. She's breathing heavy and the heart's going up, I could tell. A while ago, and it's been a while, I substituted God for money in my life. I thought we were supposed to pursue the American dream and have this wonderful life filled with things and money and all this stuff. And so what ended up happening, and I knew better than that. I mean, I read the warning label. It didn't apply to me, right? So we found ourselves in debt. And we were drowning, serving the God of money. Beyond that, we started withholding our tithe from God. A drought came, and it plagued our lives. Honestly, one day I received a wake-up call, and it was this warning label from Malachi chapter 3. Take a look, verses 8 through 10. God is speaking here. He says, will a man rob God? Yet you rob me. And God says, but you ask, how do we rob you? And he says, in tithes and offerings. Verse 9, here's the warning label. Here's what stood out to me when I read it. You are under a curse. And he talks about the whole nation of you, Israel, because you are robbing me. You're robbing me. Bring the whole tithe into the storehouse, that there may be food in my house. Test me in this, says the Lord Almighty, and see if I will not throw open the floodgates of heaven and pour out so much blessing that you will not have room enough for it. Okay, so here's a warning sign of my life. You know why? I think we've got to have this American dream and live and have all this stuff and have wealth and riches, but it was costing us money, and God had put a drought in our lives. And I read this warning label and go, okay, do I heed it or do I just read it, So we had a family meeting. I said, you know what, it's time. We've got to get our hearts right. Let's start giving 10% of our gross income back to the church. It's been a while ago. It hasn't happened since we've been here, trust me. It didn't make sense to us, honestly. I know some of you have been through this and you go, the math doesn't add up. How can we afford to give more to the church? And it just doesn't make sense. But God provided. It was really kind of weird to see. I'm not saying we didn't struggle through that time. I'm telling you, we struggled. We wondered how we were getting more money out of this. But God, instead of money, held the place in our hearts again. Those of you who tithe, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Those of you who give 10% of your gross income, you know what I'm talking about. You've been there, you've seen it, and you see how God provides for you no matter what. The drought ended for us. The rain started to fall. Today we find ourselves living to please God instead of ourselves or instead of the money, instead of trying to figure out where the next dollar is coming from. When God is not on the throne of our hearts, this is the warning that I heeded, life does not work the way we think it should. But when we put God in his rightful place at the center of our lives, when our primary commitment, passion, energy, and resources go to him, things start to fall in place again. Back to the story in 1 Kings 18, and we see a royal rumble. It's pretty cool. Between Elijah and Ahab, one of my favorite stories in the Bible. It's here it is, 1 verses 950. Okay, here it is. Elijah, one man, Elijah versus the 450 prophets of Baal, and together with the 400 prophets of Asherah. They're all gathered together on this mountaintop. In verse 21, I love this. Elijah went before the people and he said, "How long will you waver between two opinions? If the Lord is God, follow him. But if Baal is God, follow him." What's the people's reaction? They do what? They say nothing. Why do they say nothing? Here's what I think. I think they want both. If they wanted to follow God, they would have said, okay, we choose God. If they wanted to follow Baal, though, they would have said, okay, we choose Baal. But I think they want to follow both. They want both. I mean, it's true for us today, isn't it? If you think about it, it's not that we don't want God in our lives. I think a lot of times it's we want God plus. Or we want whatever in our lives, money, wealth, career, whatever it is, maybe, and then maybe fit God in there somewhere. We kind of want both today. And I think that's what they want back then. They want both. So the people are gathered on Mount Carmel, and the prophets of Baal, they get to go first. Elijah says, I'll let you go first, okay? So they construct an altar, and they place a bowl on top, and Elijah tells them, here's what I want you to do. Call on your God and see if he will light your fire for you. See if he will consume the sacrifice. So here's what they do. From morning until noon, the people of Baal, they call on Baal to light the fire. But Baal doesn't respond. Baal's not real. All right, so here's what it is. Elijah's response. At noon, Elijah began to taunt them. I love it. This is getting good, right? How often do the religious people taunt the worldly people? Not very often. We're the ones that get made fun of, right? But Elijah takes his turn. He says, "Shout louder. Surely he's a god. Perhaps he's in deep thought or busy or traveling. Maybe he's sleeping and must be awakened." Baal's not real. So they start shouting. They start dancing. They even cut themselves with swords and spears. And despite all that, nothing happens. Baal's not real. They're bleeding for their gods, and they're thinking, and we're left thinking, how ridiculous is this? I mean, this looks pretty dumb, right? You know? Again, are we really that different? You know, how many of us have almost bled out on the altar of maybe alcohol or entertainment or sexual pleasure or whatever? How many of us have sacrificed money and time or our families in order to please ourselves? Oh, we bleed for our gods. May not be the same way they are here, but we bleed for our gods. So the time of the evening sacrifice has come. Baal hasn't responded. Again, he's not real. And now it's Elijah's turn. He gets his men to dig a trench around the altar. He douses the altar with gallons and gallons of water, and Elijah steps forward. Verse 36, at the time of the sacrifice, the prophet Elijah stepped forward and he prayed, "O Lord, God of Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, let it be known today that you are God in Israel, and that I am your servant, and have done all these things at your command." It's not about me. It's all about God. Answer me, O Lord, answer me, so these people will know that you, O Lord, are God, and that you are turning their hearts back again. Verse 38, then the fire of the Lord fell and burned up the sacrifice, the wood, the stones, and the soil, and also licked up the water in the trench. Oh. When all the people saw this, they fell prostrate and cried, "The Lord, he is God. The Lord, he is God." And once again, the story is all about the glory of God. And I ask you this morning, what's it going to take for you to put down your idols and fall to your knees and cry out, "The Lord, he is God"? At the end of this chapter of the story, if you read chapter 15 this week, we read about a prophet named Hosea. This story is way beyond me. I don't get it. God comes to Hosea and he tells him, I want you to go out and marry a prostitute named Gomer. God comes to me and tells me to marry a prostitute. We're going to have words. Hosea doesn't hesitate. He obeys. He goes out, he marries this prostitute named Gomer. Seems like a strange request. And for a while, for Hosea, life is pretty good. He's got his wife, he loves her, and things are great. And then one day, Hosea comes home and Gomer's missing. And he thinks to himself, oh, she must be out doing her thing again, selling her body for money. And so Hosea goes down to where he first met Gomer and discovers her on a street corner with her arm around another man, ready to transact another deal. And Hosea is devastated. And he asks God, what am I supposed to do now? My heart is broken. And God tells Hosea, go back and buy her a second time. Pay money for her. Hire her to be your prostitute, but bring her back home to be your wife again, and bring her back home to be with you. Why? Why? What in the world is God doing here? Hosea chapter 3, verse 1 shows God's heart. And God says, love her as the Lord loves the Israelites, though they turn to other gods. Love her as the Lord loves the Israelites, though they turn to other gods. I think we've offended God with our hidden idolatry. We've hurt God by allowing other things and other people to become more important than He. And we've not made God a priority. We're like the Israelites. We're kind of prostituting ourselves out to other things, saying we follow God, but really we don't. We haven't made God a priority. Oh, we mark it off. You know, we check it off our list of things to do for the week. Oh, 1 hour of worship in church each Sunday? Sure, why not? I can do that. We mark it off. But God says this. He says, I want you back. I don't want you just for an hour on Sundays. I want you every minute of your life. I still love you with all my heart. And maybe the only thing you need to hear today is this. You matter to God. And God still loves you. The question is, does God still matter to you? And do you love Him? He's after you. He's coming after you full force, wanting your heart. He doesn't want to compete with some idol like television or Facebook or women or men or careers or financial status or anything like that. There's no reason to compete with that. He says you got to choose one or the other, who you're going to follow, Baal or God. I still love you. You matter to God, God says.